Yesterday, I went out to my favourite spot, Burley Heads, to put two S23 Ultras against each other, to find out what's been improved from OneUI 5.1 to OneUI 6 when it comes to the camera. Let's find out which is better. Let's go. Welcome everyone to Tech with Benefits, Daniel here. Yesterday, when I went to Burley, I wanted to test as much as I could between OneUI 5.1 and OneUI 6 on the two S23 Ultras that I had. Before we dive in, let's take a look at the operation of these cameras, because a lot has changed. I did cover some of this in my last video, but let's recap and also add to what I said. Starting with the look and the feel and the design. That is immediately what you notice when you first launch the camera on OneUI 6. The font has changed, the feel, the general interface looks and interacts. It's just a different vibe about it. I like it. It's fresh and it's a bit more professional and purposeful. The second thing you notice too is Samsung has separated out the resolutions from the aspect ratio when it comes to photos. I like this change a lot. It just means that you're able to know what you're shooting in. Rather than shooting in 4:3 and not knowing a resolution you're capturing, this allows you to know. It goes 12 megapixel and then you change the aspect ratio. What's nice about this change too is Samsung, whether intentionally or not, has allowed you to tweak aspect ratio for higher resolution. So if you're, for example, capturing a 200 megapixel photo, you can change it to a 1:1 aspect ratio. As an example, it doesn't actually capture a 200 megapixel 1:1 photo. It crops it down to 150 megapixel. But previously, to achieve this, you'd have to take the 200 megapixel photo in 4:3 and then edit it afterwards. This removes that step. You can just do it all from here. I like it. Samsung has brought this design ethos across to video as well, making it a lot simpler to change resolutions and frame rate. The aspect ratio for photos doesn't extend though into video. If you go and change to a 1:1 aspect ratio for video, it will limit it to full HD 30 frames per second. Just be aware of that. Something that's new that I didn't cover in the last video is that night mode now gets the 2x crop button put into it. It was something that I thought was quite odd that didn't come in when the 2x crop came into photos, but they've brought it in with OneUI 6. In terms of differences in output, I'm not noticing anything. I think they did it for night mode before and just didn't put the button there. Because when you look at these two photos, OneUI 5.1 versus OneUI 6, there's really no difference in the 2x night mode. So I think realistically, they've just added the button in so it's an easier experience. The other UI change that I really like is the photo leveler now makes its way across to more camera modes. So I think it first debuted in like Pro mode and Expert RAW, but now you get it everywhere. The only one you don't get it in is Panorama, which I think is totally reasonable because, well, you can figure that out. But for this to work, you need to make sure you have grid lines on. If you don't like grid lines because you think it interrupts your photo, get over it. Grid lines being turned on enables the photo leveler to be widespread across your camera. And it really does make a difference. You'll see later on when we compare the video, the difference that it does actually and can make. Diving into the settings, we've got some neat little updates here. One particular one I really liked is the auto scan for documents. Samsung decided to remove the document scanning feature out of Scene Optimizer. Great move. And they've added features to it like auto scan. Auto scan's really simple. Turn this on, point your camera at the document and automatically recognizes it and then captures it and then allows you to edit it straight away. Really simple and great for receipts. So highly recommend jumping into the settings and turning that toggle on. Also what they've done too is they've brought features out from Camera Assistant into the full-fledged version of OneUI 6. What they've done is the quality optimization settings that were previously housed in Camera Assistant are now part of the full camera settings. I tested it just to see what the differences were between the maximum and the quick shutter speed. What I noticed when you turned maximum off and put it on to the fastest shutter speed setting, it turned off Scene Optimizer. Because obviously it's doing no post-processing, it's about capturing it as quick as possible. And you notice that. When I tested it out on the kids in the lounge room, I did it through the window so you could kind of see if any HDR was happening, and there wasn't. So it's up to you. I myself prefer maximum because it means I get the maximum quality and it's fast enough as it is. So you decide, but just know that that's now part of the camera settings in One UI 6. For high resolution shots, Samsung has enabled a toggle, this is in Camera Assistant, for digital upscaling. So for example, if you're taking a 200 megapixel shot and then you zoom in, right, that's a digital crop that you're doing because you're zooming in from the 200 megapixel. What the upscaling toggle does is it upscales it back to 200 megapixels. Again, I wanted to see what this actually did, so I turned it off and took a photo at 4x zoom and then turned it back on. With this photo of the bricks, you'll see side by side, yeah, there's definitely some upscaling of detail happening, but it's also not too bad before. So up to you if you want to leave this on, but just know that that's now part of the settings and you can activate it. You can turn off the toggle, which enables you to switch to the front camera just by swiping up. If you accidentally do that all the time, this could be the toggle for you. Turn that off. It stops it from happening. For video, Samsung enabled an extra feature within auto frame rate. So within auto FPS in the settings, you can activate it just for 30 FPS only if you wish. In its current state with One UI 5, it just does it for all frame rates that you're recording in. This way, if you just want to lock it at 60 frames per second, you could toggle it back to 30 frames per second and away you go. There's a new camera widget, which I really appreciate. You can set a widget on your home screen. When you press on this widget, you can set it so it opens up to a certain camera mode. And then even further, you can save it to a specific album. Really great for traveling, or if you shoot a lot of video, you can set it to open up to the video and then save it to your videos folder or holiday folder, whatever it is you want to do. It's great, and I'm looking forward to doing this on my next trip. Absolutely. Now, this is one that I didn't get to cover on the last video I made because the update hadn't come through. But then Expert RAW got an update and it's enabled this feature called ND filter. We know what ND filters are. It's basically, simple terms, like a pair of sunglasses for your camera. It limits the amount of light that comes through, acting as like an extra step or an extra stop for the light as it's coming and passing through into your sensor. Samsung has enabled this in Expert RAW under Labs. So what you do is when you have this activated, you press the ND button in the top corner and it gives you the option to change the ND step level. So it goes from ND2 all the way up to ND1000 and sort of varying levels in between. I tested this out on the main camera. In super bright conditions, I ran into a bit of a problem because at ND1000, at the top level, the darkest level, the settings with the ND filter in Expert RAW, they only allow you to manually control. So there's no auto settings. It doesn't automatically set the shutter speed and the ISO. You've got to do that yourself. The problem is that it limits it. So the shutter speed can only be as fast as 0.5 of a second at ND level 1000. That could be a bit of a problem, especially in super bright conditions. And with the lens being f1.7 on the main camera, there's still quite a bit of light that's making its way through. So I tested it, and as you can see, it's not quite right. Then I had a bit of a epiphany, I guess you could say, and realized that the 10 times camera is capable. Samsung have only enabled the main, the 3 times, and the 10 times on the S23 Ultra anyway, and the 10 times I think is the perfect candidate for the use of this feature. Reason being, it's got an f4.9 aperture. So in super bright conditions, it's already not letting through a ton of light. So turning on the ND filter, it can darken it again. The thing I noticed with the ND filter too, is that if you scale the level, it expands how quick the shutter speed can be. So if you drop it down to 512, the shutter speed can become a little bit faster. It still doesn't get as fast as what Expert RAW does on its own. I did do a bit of a comparison between an ND filter and a normal Expert RAW shot. You can see the normal Expert RAW shot looks well balanced. The shutter speed was really fast. The ND filter one had no post-processing whatsoever, so just be aware of that too. And it just was different. But obviously there's different purposes for what this is capable of doing. I decided to match the settings. I did the Expert RAW at the same settings as the ND filter, and you'll notice that the ND filter does block a lot of light. So even though it doesn't actually have a physical filter in front of it, it's doing quite okay in software to process that. So I'm looking forward to testing this out a little bit more. Come follow me on Twitter/X to see how I go. Bottom line, the 10 times camera I think will be your go-to in brighter conditions, and then when you get to a little bit lower light conditions, switch it to the main camera or the 3 times and you'll have a good time. Okay, let's get into the comparison. Let's start with photos, and I gotta say it was very hard to find a difference. Almost impossible. I almost cancelled this video because of how similar the photos turned out between the two software variants. But I did dig a little bit deeper, and I was eventually able to find some improvements or differences between how they process certain things. I took photos in a lot of different lighting conditions. I took photos with every camera at every zoom range you could think of, and yeah, it was a struggle, but we got there. The first thing I noticed is in how OneUI 6 handles grass. It's subtle, but when you look at it from a distance, you might not notice it, but when you start to really sort of peep in, there's a different shade of green or style of green that it processes the grass compared to OneUI 5.1. It's not as if it punches it up or gives it a bit more vibrancy. It's just different. I don't know how else to describe it. You can see in the photos I'm putting up now, there is some differences in the shades of green, and even when you do crop in, you notice it a little bit more. That same really subtle change extends to the sky as well. And it doesn't matter sort of which camera you're using, the sky is just that fraction of a different shade of blue. And it's not as if it's that different. Like if you looked at it from a distance, you go, it's the same phone took those photos, because they did. It's just that it's just a little bit different in terms of the shade of blue and the shade of green. That's what I noticed in that instance. Another thing I noticed too is in some of the trees that I was taking photos of, there's like a less yellow tinge to OneUI 6 versus OneUI 5. Again, it's just a difference in how it's processing certain shades and colors. The overall HDR and the overall contrast, that all balance seems to remain the same. It was one thing I noticed with my S23 Ultra in a video that's going to come later on this week, is that the S23 Ultra favors lighter shadows and less contrasty blacks and colors. Whereas your folds, your flips, you'll see that to be a little bit different in a video that comes out a little bit later. But that hasn't changed here. The S23 Ultra in both OneUI 6 and OneUI 5 is still doing that same thing. It's just processing some colors a little bit differently. I tested the portrait mode, and again, that same yellow thing happened in that my face was a little bit more natural and cooler versus OneUI 5. That extended into the 1x and the 2x portrait. One thing I did notice though is the 2x portrait had a better HDR processing of the background. That could just be a margin of error, but you notice it when you put the two side by side in just a point and shoot situation. In high resolution mode, there was no difference. There was next to no difference between the two in both 200 megapixels and at 50 megapixels. One thing I spoke about earlier was the new toggle to upscale high resolution photos when you digitally zoom in. So I wanted to see if that was already on by default for OneUI 5, and it looks like it was. In these two shots here, both at 4x 200 megapixel, the OneUI 5 looks the same as OneUI 6. So what it shows to me is that Samsung has just brought this toggle out to disable something that was already active. So at least you know that now. I tested some long range zoom, 30 times, 100 times. No, they're the same. And 10 times as well. All that area looks identical. There's no extra detail that you're gaining from the new software. It already was good. It's still good. At nighttime, there's maybe a potential for it to be processed a little bit better, especially in the 10 times. I did notice that I've got this building near my house that lights up at night, and you can see the 10 times on OneUI 6 is a lot sharper versus the 10 times on OneUI 5. But at 1x zoom at night mode, they're the same. There's absolutely no difference. The processing, the sharpness is all still there. It's all the same. For selfies, I actually noticed something a little bit strange. The normal selfies were fine. They were the same. What was different was portrait selfies. In the end, I got them to look the same in these two photos here. But the thing is, the photo you see from OneUI 6 was the 6th attempt at getting that shot. Whereas on OneUI 5.1, that was the first attempt at it. Every attempt before that on OneUI 6 looked like this photo. Completely blown out sky, just absolutely no definition in the background, which was really, really bizarre. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Eventually I got it, but it was just weird that it took that long. Switching to video, I tried everything that was needed. 4K 30, same. 4K 30 stabilization, same. 8K 30, same. There is no change. And I think that's a good thing. Samsung have already got excellent video capabilities. I'm a big user of their video. My entire channel, at this point, it's no secret, is shot using the S23 Ultra or the Z Fold 5. Either one. Occasionally Flip makes an appearance. But that's, you get the point, right? Samsung's video capabilities are strong, and it's a lot to do with their processing with this series of phones in general. What I like a lot with One UI 6 that doesn't change the quality, but improves how you can capture video. It's the leveler feature. And I've already started putting it to use in my YouTube channel, for example, in that I can use it when I'm using portrait video to make sure this is nice and level. Previously, I'd have to rely on, like a leveler on the tripod that I'm using, but using the leveler on the phone, it's really, really good and allows me to be confident in the output that I'm producing. But even so, when you're using normal content outside, side by side, you can keep the video in a much more level position because you're using the leveler to guide you. So even though you've got stabilization that's excellent, you might be able to get straighter footage by keeping the horizon line straight. So something to be aware of. Absolutely turn that on, even though I already told you. Selfie video, I absolutely think One UI 6 is better. I don't know what it is. In fact, I do. You can see it here. The contrast of the video, the HDR, it just looked a little bit better. And I tried to test the microphone in this instance as well. Here I noticed no difference, but I'll throw it over to you. Take a listen and let me know in the comments which one sounds the best. Let's see which one sounds better. I'm in a very windy, very noisy environment, so it's going to be hard to really judge it, but you tell me. Overall, I'm very happy that I put this one together. I know in the end it showed very minuscule differences, if anything really, like changing the processing of grass, that's not really an improvement or an update, it's just different. But at least we know the differences now between One UI 5 and One UI 6, and for me, that's what made this video worth doing. Make sure you subscribe, because this week I'm going to be working on my 2023 Galaxy flagship camera comparison, where I put together the S23 Ultra, the S23 FE, Z Flip 5 and Z Fold 5 together when I went on holiday to Italy. Make sure you subscribe for when that drops, so turn the bell icon on as well. Like this video because that helps the algorithm, and also between now and the next video, coming out with me on Twitter/X and also on Instagram. I'll chuck some of these photos up on Instagram so you can get a bit of a look at them on there as well. But thanks for tuning in. See you next one. You!